right now we want to welcome to the show the social housing spokesperson for the Greens, Ricardo Menendez March. Ricardo, good morning and thank you for joining us.
Good morning. Kia ora.
It's very nice to see your face today. Nice to talk to you yesterday briefly, and thank you for giving us a little bit of time today.
All good. It's nice to be here with you too.
The big question, I guess, before we start is, and I know it was a bit long-winded and it was more than 10 minutes, which I said to you yesterday. Did you manage to see the clip we had yesterday that we talked about when we started to pose the questions of this housing crisis? What is it? What's going on?
Yeah, no, it was fascinating watching Chris Luxon grapple with Ryan Bridge in terms of defining affordability, and also I guess like tangibly talking about the solutions that people would want around rents. And what to me it really shows is that if there's no willingness to have real intervention in the market and to clamp down on how much rent landlords can charge, we're not going to see those results. So it's really telling that the National is entering with this sort of vague proposals that ultimately do nothing to curtail the powers of landlords.
Yeah, I guess from an outside looking in, I think one of the, and I'll say jobs, I don't know if that's the right word, but one of the things that oppositional parties do is they throw out big statements because they don't need to prove themselves. But when you're criticizing quite specifically a number, i.e. rents have increased by $50, for people who don't know, this is what Chris Luxon said yesterday morning on the AM show. I think it's appropriate for media to say, well, if you say $50 increase is too much, how much are you going to reduce it by? And I think most of us skeptics who aren't involved in the halls of power, Ricardo, go, when have we ever seen a price decrease when it comes to rent? What landlords have ever decreased their prices because they've got more money in their pockets rather than just put more money in their pockets? So it feels like a little bit of someone's just playing games. He's playing games and he's playing games that way. But the point that we wanted to start to investigate was this whole idea around what should we be paying for rent in a fair and equitable community, and what are we paying in rent? And you saw the clip yesterday. And for people who didn't, at one stage, Christopher Luxon mentioned 40% of income would be fair, which is incredibly high on a world stage. It's too high, in fact. But we're unclear whether what the measurement should be or is around the world is 40% of your wage or 40% of the household income, because those are two very different questions as to what has then become fair for housing. Can you help us out with some of those ponderings?
Yeah, I mean, I think just starting, I really disagree with the sort of opposition framing that their role is just to oppose for the sake of opposing and then just throwing some random statements, right? I think that's actually what's making politics really toxic, that we should be, the Greens are effectively, for all intents and purposes, in opposition. And I see our role actually as proposing tangible solutions. In terms of the ratio of income to rents, what we've been clear is that we should be legislating so that people pay no more than 30% of their individual income into rent.
So the Greens, the Greens are saying no more than 30% of your individual. So the average wage at the moment in New Zealand is $58,000. So on average, obviously there's many people who are far worse off than that, and there are many people who are better off than that. But on average, 30% on that would be what you guys are advocating for the average earner to pay in rent.
Yeah, and I mean, what we do have already are, I mean, the thing is, we kind of have a section of the population who are protected by income-related rents, right? So it's not like we don't have any sort of measures that can guarantee this. And I mean, state housing tenants are protected by measures that gives them that certainty. The issue is that over the decades, we've kind of chipped away the eligibility criteria for people to qualify for this subsidy that guarantees people to have affordable rents. And in many places in the world, actually the eligibility for such types of subsidies is way higher. And then in places like Vienna, which has a really strong public housing program, it's quite common for people to live in public housing where they're protected by paying only a proportion of their income into rent. So for us, part of getting there is implementing rent controls. And it's about expanding the eligibility of public housing. Less so kind of hoping that landlords will benevolently just choose to arbitrarily lower their rents, which, as you've mentioned,
is
It doesn't
unlikely.
happen. It doesn't happen. It just doesn't happen. I mean, we can't leave it to the market to sort of regulate itself and have reasonable rents.
I'm sorry to be a mathematician here, but this is the information that I think I need, and I don't know if the clip you saw yesterday was included this, but part of my desire to understand these sorts of things well is we used to have, and if you've seen this, I'm just repeating myself, but people who didn't see the clip yesterday, is to have accuracy on what the data says. So when I was working as a talkback host, there used to be data in the media a lot about there used to be headlines in the media, not data, about how, foreign nationals are sending the price of houses through the roof, but when the data came out, it was 1.5% or less of house sales were being bought by foreign nationals. And to me, it screamed of racial undertones, because especially in Auckland, there was a lot of people of Asian ancestry buying houses. And so what the racial undertones were, I see Asians buying houses, they're foreign nationals, rather than these people live and work and breed in New Zealand. So I think the data was giving the wrong impression as to why. And I think the last 2 years of no migrants and house prices going through the roof is evident that it's not necessarily migration that's under it. So what I want, but I want some clarity. Yeah, as you said, 30% of one's income, is that gross or net? Because that also makes a difference. Because 30% of 58 is 17,000. 30% of gross is going to be a third less than that. What do the Greens say they think is?
I mean, that's a good question. I'm open. I mean, I would say that ideally we should be aiming for net, but I believe the way that income-related rent subsidies would likely be calculated, for example, is gross. And so, I mean, I think, look, in my view, what we should be aiming to is to have rents as low as possible. Again, this is why public housing, to me, is the most ideal solution. In terms of other ways to curtail that, is to have rent controls where, if in terms of the numbers, what we would be looking to see is things like setting a limit to how much you can increase rents by, set by no higher than basically like wage growth or inflation growth, minus 1%. So what this guarantees is that what we are seeing is wages going up, ideally at an equal or faster rate than rent increases. So that's one way of getting there. And by kind of having rent freezes and rent controls at the same time, like, we are actually realistically able to get there. What we did during the pandemic is we had rent freezes, but we didn't put rent controls, right? So what happens is once you end the rent freezes, we just see a spike in rents and
a double increase.
Yeah, and so this is kind of why we need both, not either. So I think, to me, this is why rent controls plus rent freezes is really key to having like a sensible way of getting incomes to catch up with rents, and not kind of look at it in isolation. And again, I think what the rent freeze has shown is that if we just leave it to the goodwill of landlords and to this idea that tenants can just go to the tenancy tribunal and challenge increases in rents if they're above sort of like the market rate. I mean, we know that process is really messy, and like, people shouldn't be expected to go through some messy judicial process to kind of to get an outcome, right? So I think we do need like legislation to curtail rent increases to get there.
And why the tenancy tribunal doesn't work is it's also got a massively long backlog of work. So even if you have been increased your rent, or you've been turfed out of your house or whatever, you've still probably got to find 2, 3, 4, 5 months worth of accommodation or costings before your case can even get seen from time to time. So it doesn't actually solve the immediate problem of some of these things that are happening. When you talk about social housing, I'd like some clarity around that, because I think about social housing as in sort of state housing. People live in state housing in New Zealand at the moment, and they pay whatever it is, 10, you see some people, because they're on a very low income or a benefit, paying $100 or $200 for a house that market rate might be $400 or $500, because that's compared to their income. Social housing to me,
thing, right? I mean,
like, no. It's not a criticism, but I'm also thinking of the practicality of it and the logistics of it. If that's going to be a solution to our renting problem, don't we need 50,000 more houses that are social housing? Because those, as far as I understand, are basically all kind of full up at the moment, or they're close to being full up. So there are a huge number of people. I think we saw yesterday 17% of the population at the moment is already paying over 40%. And correct me if I'm wrong here with this, George, but something like 37% are already paying over 30%. So if you think about 37 instead, you might have 50% of the population already paying over 30%. If social housing is the answer, that's a huge proportion of people that need help. And I don't think you or I think we'll agree that you can't provide that many people that many social houses to solve it. So there's got to be other things as well.
Well, I mean, I would argue against that. I think part of the problem with this government's approach, which is kind of following what National was doing, is that how they're doing developments at the moment. So, for example, if you take places like Mangere, 2/3 of the housing that they are doing, it's still private housing. So we are not prioritizing building enough public housing. Labour can talk all they want about how they're building more state homes than National, which was a really low bar considering National was selling them off. But I think the truth is that we could be building far more public housing and therefore working towards increasing the eligibility criteria, which we've been chipping away at. So, I mean, again, this is one of the levers we should be pushing on top of things like rent controls. The other great thing about public housing is that in places around the world where you see substantive building of public housing, house prices do tend to decrease. And this is why, for example, in my select committee in Parliament, like I've seen petitions of people trying to stop state housing developments because there's property developers and investors are so worried about how, effectively it's going to ghettoize their community, but that's code for house prices decreasing. And so part of what we've been saying in the select committee and when the housing ministers come is, look, you should be tweaking that ratio of private versus state house that you're building, because the private market homes that the government is building, they're not even within reach for most working class people. I mean, and so like if you're going to be doing government interventions, make it public housing so that you home those people on the waiting list, work towards increasing the eligibility criteria, and guarantee that more people will not pay more than 30% of their income and rents.
Yeah. No, I mean, I'm always critical of political parties who talk about, we're going to build more houses, etc. We're going to, 10,000 Kiwi build, because I'm like, well, so where are those builders coming from? Where are those people coming from? I already know that I have to wait 6 months to get a builder to come look at a bathroom reno. And all of a sudden, we're going to pull 10,000 houses out our ass. So I'm always wary with the idea of we're just going to build more houses. But look, we're going to move on, Ricardo, and we're going to continue this conversation. But before we do, I just want to ask you one other question, completely aside to it. And we're going to have Michael Baker coming up next for people who were talking about a bit earlier on for a quick chat. Is two quick questions. The first one was the Greens' response to the decision yesterday. George, can you bring up that screenshot that we showed earlier, where there was a very strong response, basically saying now is not the time to pull mandates on? What is the thoughts behind that from the Greens?
Yeah, I mean, our approach has been one where we say, look, COVID is by no means over. The reality is that our peak, for example, in the South Island hasn't even arrived. And so right now is not the time, as the graphics that you just pulled up says, to wind down restrictions. I think a lot of people are feeling really worn down by the pandemic, and that's totally fair enough. But the answer is to provide support for free N95s, better income support so that people are better supported, and more support for students in schools. Not go down the route of like Australia and other countries that have seen, massive amounts of death. We are very protected by our high vaccination rates and the quality of the vaccines.
Yep.
But it doesn't mean that COVID has gone away and that it does not pose a risk for a mass disabling event for many. So more support directly for people, cash in hand payments, free 95s masks, instead of just loosening restrictions all around.
The last thing, you talked to me yesterday when we had a chat on the phone about being involved with immigration for the Greens. We do have to move on. I've got already two people queued up who want to talk to us next. So I apologize for rushing this question. But I know of a case in Dunedin where a family is being denied residency because their child, well, I can't say because it's the only reason, but one of the reasons is their child has Down syndrome. And I thought, living in a country where we're being told we're a team of 5 million, that we're supposed to look after our neighbor, that we're a caring, sharing community, is this something that's fairly common? And although I'm not asking you for, advice from an MP to this particular family, what does that happen, and what can a family do? Because that sounds disgusting to me.
I've been working very closely on that case. It's absolute bullcrap that we have a policy that basically exempts migrants being protected by their human rights. We've signed up to conventions protecting the rights of disabled people, and the government just tramples all over it. So people shouldn't be discriminated because they're disabled. People can do appeals, but again, they're very lengthy. So we are working towards scrapping that policy that means those kind of families face barriers.